let's begin. So we live in a world of constant change. There really isn't any way to avoid it. Some change is bad, some change is good, but fundamentally all change is disruptive in one way or another. Now, I wish I could tell you that I had some magic silver bullet that would make everything turn out okay. I don't, it doesn't exist, I'm sorry. But there are some skills and some strategies that you can learn that can help deal with this world of constant change. So the lens I'm going to use today comes from the United Nations Guidance on Building Resilient Societies, but the concept of resilience applies pretty much anywhere. So you can share these concepts across your resilience as an individual, resilience as a project, resilience as a community, resilience as an organization, and resilience in technology. So the way they talk about it, they talk about a capacity for resilience, building your capacity for resilience. And as part of that, there's a set of capacities that help. So the first one is the capacity to anticipate. So no one can predict the future. If someone tells you they can predict the future, they are completely deluded or lying. But you can build an awareness of where you are and where you're going and what's going on. You can get an early warning system for what might be coming in terms of change or disruption or risk. And you can also take early action to prepare for the things that you see coming. So on a personal level, having a mindset of accepting that change is normal is actually an important part of preparing for change, because when it hits, you're not surprised, right? You're ready for it. You know, okay, change is here. Another thing that can help is a sort of a mindset of continuous self-discovery, understanding who you are and what you're capable of, and also being willing to learn new things when you realize that maybe I'm not capable enough yet. Maybe I could prepare for these things that I see coming. Building support networks of other human beings is incredibly important because we are stronger together than we are as separate, isolated individuals. If you talk about technology, there are some things that you might do to help build resilience. You might implement monitoring, so you know how things are going and you get early warning signs of when things aren't going so great. You might design your architecture with features like redundancy, multiple instances of services so that when one fails, you can switch over to another one. You might design with supervisors that'll restart services when they fail. You might design with isolation in mind so that when one service fails, it doesn't start a cascade of other failures that then cause absolutely everything to go horribly wrong. In the context of so security applies across every area of resilience, but in the context of the capacity to anticipate, it's about thinking ahead for the kind of problems that you might have and preparing for them. Intentionally planning and designing for security. That is really the best place to start. It's not always where everyone starts at the very beginning before you have a line of code, but it really is the best place to start with security. When you talk about projects or communities or organizations, the capacity to anticipate is about strategy. It's about understanding, taking the time to think through, understand where you are, where you want to be, where you might end up if you don't watch carefully. And it's also about looking beyond your own project or community to see the trends outside that might impact you, positively or negatively. And breaking those down to see where the risks might be and what the causes of the risks might be, because that gives you the information that you need to prepare for them. Watch for interactions between different projects, between different communities, between different organizations, because just like in technology, a failure in one system, in one human group, in one human society can lead to another failure and another failure and another failure, cascading effects of failure. So the goal is not to wallow in like the horrible world that's coming, but to realize that you can take steps in advance to prevent problems, to prepare for changes, to smooth the path, and then reduce those risks. Building community is an important part of this anticipatory capacity. It is preparing for the time when you will need a strong community. You don't need a strong community every day, but you build one every day because I guarantee there will come a time when you need it. Outreach is important. It has to do with those interactions. So it's not just talking to the people who already know what you're working on, who already know the amazing work you're doing, but also making connections across different projects, different communities. Collaboration is one of the key strengths for this anticipatory capacity. It helps with if you think about it, so collaboration is a potential for smoothing out some of those bumps, for smoothing out some of those risks, but only if people are actually participating, right? Like if you throw an open source project out and no one is actually contributing to it, you're not getting that benefit of collaboration. And if you're collaborating, but you're collaborating in a million different directions, you're not really getting the full benefit of that collaboration. So part of that strategy, part of that anticipation is collaborating and working together to work toward a shared vision. It's also important to make sure that you have the right people in the room. If you have one small group of people who are all almost exactly the same, they will look at problems in a certain way. They will come up with solutions in a certain way. If you get a bunch of different people with a bunch of different experiences, or a bunch of different companies with a bunch of different problems, they will approach it differently, and together, working together toward a shared vision, they will see more problems, they will solve more problems in a better way. Redundancy is relevant when you get to projects too, when you get to communities too. And that is, don't rely too heavily on any one person, on any one company, on any one idea. Make sure that you have backups in place. Make sure that you are lifting up the whole community, the whole set of collaborators, and not just relying on a few rock stars. So this anticipatory capacity is something that open source has always been very good at. It has been one of open source's strengths in the sense that, so when you talk about redundancy, if you have a single company developing a software project, if that company goes under or just changes their mind about whether they want to invest in that project, it's gone, it's dead. That's the end. Open source is helpful in the sense that it is actually more than just one company's idea or one person's idea. It gives it a strength and resilience that you don't have in other ways of developing software. So the anticipatory capacity is also where you sort of bring in the idea of adoption, both for newcomers and also enterprise, because this, and interoperability in the sense that, so adoption is like bringing in new users, so it's expanding your user base. Interoperability is about expanding your use cases. And both of these are a form of redundancy. Like if you have 5 users, or you only get used for one thing ever, well, what if the world changes and, you know, that one thing that you're good at is no longer useful? It happens all the time in technology. So adoption is important, interoperability is important for long-term growth. The second capacity is the capacity to absorb. And by this, it's like the shock comes and whoof, Do you absorb it or do you just get blown over? Like, can you withstand it? So this is sometimes described as the ability to bounce back. So at a personal level, a lot of it is about having a sense of perspective when changes come, when risks come, when things don't go great. Understanding that in the big picture and in the long-term view, as hard as this thing is right now, this is not all there is. And that really does help build up a resilient capacity in the mind. But it's also about taking action. When you see things are not going well, if you sit quietly, that is never going to help. It's not going to change. So taking action, even if it's the smallest thing you could possibly do, like even if you can't change the world, you can take one step and you can make things a little bit better. And that is an important part of resilience, is that mindset of just keep improving, keep going. So in the technical sense, the capacity to absorb is about how you respond to negative events or failures and how you recover from them, while continuing to function, right? So it's not just about, okay, everything went down for 3 days and then we were back up. It's about recovering gracefully and well. It's about limiting the impact of the failures. So in a security sense, absorb is how you respond to a security event. In this context, you're thinking about things like vulnerability management, you're thinking about things like responsible disclosures, and it is part of the whole big picture of security, but the ability to absorb a security event when it happens is an important part of resilience. When you get into like projects and communities and organizations, the capacity to absorb is, you can think of it almost like a stress test of all that work that you did for the early warning and the early action, to consider what might happen and prepare for it. This is the stress test for how well you did. So did you build strong enough safety nets? Did you design workable contingency plans that covered enough of what was going to come with you, or had enough flexibility in them to adapt to a situation that wasn't exactly like you expected? Have you built healthy governance structures that can manage a difficult time? So absorbing is another area where open source has always had a strength. There have been many times throughout the history of open source when, in a big or a small way, the presence of freely available software to accomplish necessary tasks absorbed a really devastating impact to the industry because it was available, because it didn't matter if one company or another went down. And because it was open, so people could evolve it to new use cases instead of just being stuck with whatever that one company thought was a good idea 10 years ago. So I'm often reminded, it's a metaphor, but when I think of open source, I'm often reminded of, there was a dark time in history, we sometimes call it the Dark Ages, when this weird countercultural group of people who just didn't care about status and didn't care about wars and winning, and they went off and they preserved art and science and history and technology of the time by quietly making copies and sharing them. We called them monks, but like, their religious purpose is not so significant in this context as that action of absorbing the dissolution of society by making things freely available and sharing them, and not buying into the dominant narrative. Next capacity. So the capacity to adapt. You can think of this as building back better. So this is, at a personal level, you can think of it as like a mindset of being willing to learn from things that have happened and improve over time. From a technical perspective, you can think of it as understanding the changing conditions and not just sticking with your original plan. So it's responding to things that change over time and doing it better. From a security perspective, it may be about understanding new threats that are out in the wild, new things that you didn't think of in your original design that you might need to think of and make changes to improve. At the level of a project or a community or an organization, it's kind of about understanding the root causes of the changes or the problems that you encountered. And then adjusting your approach to things to respond to what has changed over time. Now, when you talk about the capacity to adapt, these are incremental changes, right? These aren't radical, big changes. This is just a continuous improvement. And that capacity is important. So you might need to be thinking about different strategies to solve different problems than you originally thought of. You might need to broaden your horizons from thinking about one project to thinking about healthy ecosystems and how a whole group of projects work together and build together. You might need to be thinking about whether you have the right people in the room to have the conversation about what the problem was and how you can solve it better. Like, are you even talking to the right people? From a leadership perspective, the capacity to adapt means that when you commit to take a role, you're not just committing the skills you have today, you're committing to grow and learn and keep evolving as new problems arise, as new circumstances mean that the project needs new things from you. And not only that, committing to train up your successors so that the project can continue long after you're even involved. The capacity to adapt might involve changing your aspirations, either because you accomplished the goals you had, and so now you need new goals, or maybe because the world around you changed and the goals you had 10 or 20 years ago really aren't relevant anymore. So I'm going to talk about a topic that people either love or hate. And I'll say that I'm old enough that I was both excited by and completely disappointed by AI in the 90s. So that means I am wearing my skeptical pants just a bit. You will often find people comparing the AI hype of today to the dot-com bubble, and that is an apt comparison because if you really look into the hype today, it's a little bit bigger than the technology is capable of right now. You know, like, it's a bit much. And in some cases, it's a bit more than the technology can really ever be capable of. But the important thing to keep in mind when you compare this to the dot-com bubble or other bubbles that have gone before for decades, the railroads, the cars, the radio, TV, transistors, personal computers, biotechnology, all the bubbles that have happened before, when the bubble bursts, the technology doesn't go away, right? The internet didn't go away when the dot-com bubble burst. Now, some companies who relied too heavily on the hype and not enough on sound business plans disappeared. Our assessment of the technology changed. It shifted from massive hype to, well, what is this practically good for? You know, this is a tool. How do we use it to good effect? When is it the right tool? When is it the wrong tool? The conversation became much more reasonable after the hype bubble burst. But the technology didn't disappear. So is AI the future of programming? If anybody tells you they know that for sure, they are lying or deluded. But I will say this. Remember that there was a time within the past century that programming looked like this. or like this. Weaving bits in copper wires is just like mind-boggling. Or like this, right? So while I can't tell you exactly what the future of programming will be, I can tell you absolutely for sure the future of programming will be different than it is right now, today, in ways that we can't even imagine. So, you know, I will say from personal experience, you know, I was born at the tail end of the mainframe era, and I learned to program at the dawn of the personal computing era, and I have lived through epochs of changes in what it means to be a programmer, and you will too. So don't approach it as a disaster that programming is changing, will change. Approach it as an opportunity. Approach it as with curiosity and delight. Go learn a new programming language every year. Go learn a new tool every year. I'm not saying you have to switch what you use as your primary, but it will broaden your horizons. It will make you a better programmer. Be curious. And if you're entirely opposed to AI, and that is okay, I'm not going to judge, take a step back and look at the broader trends, all right? The broader trend here is not AI. AI is just a tool. The broader trend is making programming easier to use and more accessible to more people. Who thought there were so many people out there who wanted to be able to program and just thought it was too hard? And they're delighted now. So, you know, if you don't want AI to be the future, well, think about alternatives. I mean, the idea of going from a human language prompt to a functional service has, like, without an intermediate step of writing code, has been an idea for a very long time. We don't necessarily need this inefficient middle piece of an AI to generate mediocre code to connect between the two. There's a lot of alternatives. If you get inspired to go work on that and that becomes your life's work, I want to hear about it because it's really interesting. Or you could think about it from another perspective. So there was a time when our society thought that reading and writing was the domain of just an elite few. Only an elite few needed to know how to read and write. That changed, and today, we don't expect everyone to be writing a novel, but we expect you to be able to write a tweet, write an email, you know, read your bank statement. You know, it's just a normal part of society. So maybe it isn't so much about a technical solution as it is about a human solution. I learned to program when I was 8 years old, and so did my son, and I will say that gave me a very native sense of, like, programming never felt foreign to me. Programming just seemed like a way of communicating with other people and with the computer, just like I do with human language. So maybe you need to, like, go out, start getting, like, teaching programming in the university level is really kind of late. Like, maybe, like, the youngest kids need to start understanding, like, even if it's an app on their phone that's purely visual, start understanding that computers are not there to dictate your lives. They're there as a tool to do what you ask them to, and they are incredibly responsive when you can learn the right language to talk to them. I'd say there's also probably a little bit right now of, you know, the hammers and nails problem. Like, when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, like, I've seen AI used in a lot of places right now where it's probably not the right tool. It's a pretty good tool for some things, it really is, but what you will see over time that will kind of even out. People will try all the things, and some of them will go well, and some of them won't, and it'll kind of like drop off the things it's really not good at. Or, you know, a company will invest billions of dollars in it and flame out, and that'll be the good lesson for everyone else. So the last capacity is the capacity to transform. And this is not incremental changes like the capacity to adapt. This is when you need something fundamentally new, when the other capacities really aren't enough to cope with the change or the situation that you're dealing with. So on a personal level, this might look something like a new job or a new city, you know, like just a change that shakes up your life. Doesn't make you a new person, but it really fundamentally changes the life you're living and how you're living it. At a technical level, this might be a redesign of the system because you found some fundamental problems that you really just couldn't address with like revisions and revisions. You might be using a new framework, you might be using new tools, you might be using a new language, really shaking up what it means while still delivering on the same goal that you were originally trying to deliver on. For security, this might mean like taking a totally new approach, replumbing your whole system for security. It also might mean if you weren't looking at security back in the anticipate phase and you start looking at security quite late, that's gonna be a transformation capacity. Like that's gonna be a radical shift. You should still do it, you should absolutely do it, it is necessary. But it's a much harder problem than if you started way back at anticipate. So when you talk about like projects and communities and organizations, the capacity transform is about sort of seeing ways that your project or community are fundamentally unsustainable and then trying to figure out new ways to approach it. So it might be about like making fundamental changes to your infrastructure. It might be about shaking up your policies. Policies in groups of people tend to accumulate over time, and like sometimes you just kind of have to shake things up a little bit and rethink why those policies are there and whether it's time to change them. The particular initiatives or programs or like big picture things that you are working on, those may not be the right things to be working on. Maybe you need to be working on something else. Institutions, sometimes the institutions need to change. Sometimes you need to create new ones. You might be thinking about, do the people who should have a voice in the work that you're doing have a voice? And if not, how do you find them? How do you empower them? How do you listen to them? And it might just be that the set of goals you started with are no longer the right set of goals for your project, for your group. And that's okay. It's disturbing. It's confusing for a while, but it is okay. In the long run, you'll be far better off looking straight into that, okay, this isn't working, than by kind of hiding from it and continuing to do things exactly the same way. So, wrapping that up, change is not something that can be avoided, but it can be managed. It can be improved. And the capacity for resilience, building your capacity for resilience as an individual, as a project, as a community, as an organization, in your technology, really can help. It really can help. And it's all those, it's the ability to anticipate, absorb, adapt, transform. And it's worth taking the time to build that capacity because it will consistently not make everything perfect, but lead to better outcomes. And obviously, a short talk like this is not going to change your life. You don't suddenly magically have a capacity for resilience, but what I can do is like plant an idea in your head that's just going to rattle around through the whole conference in every talk you see, and maybe set you on a path to building that capacity for resilience, which over the next years will mean you have better outcomes in every aspect of life. Any questions? I actually don't know where questions come from. Do they come from a mic? Do they come from an app? All right, well, if you don't have any questions now, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be around. I love to talk to people and hear about what they're working on. So thank you.